Good evening, everybody. Today we discuss about the public debt or public borrowing. Already in last two lectures in government finance, basically we see about the government revenue and government expenditure, or that is known as a public revenue and public expenditure. So where we discuss about the various ways how the government can collect the revenue. It may be taxable ways are there or non-taxable revenues are there, and afterwards they collection the revenue, they try to spend the revenue on welfare of the society, and that is known as expenditure of a public expenditure. So now we have to think about that is another third important aspect of our government finance, that is the public debt or public borrowing. So it's a quite important part of public finance. So basically, the public debt is taken by the government bodies, or where there are various government bodies are there. So if the government bodies are taking some debt from domestic, or maybe they can take a debt from the international level, so such a debt is known as a public debt. So basically the public debt is the source of the collection income by state. So that is the new source where government can get the money through the public debt, or that is the one source to getting the income from the people in terms of the debt. So public debt or local debt is a debt the state collects from the citizens of the other countries. So basically, there are some two types of basically debts are there: domestic and external debts is there. So domestic debt means the government can collect the money from their own peoples or citizens, and when they are taking the getting the debt or some currency from the outsiders, it may be some foreigners, so they foreign institutions or foreign individuals or from other country. Such a debt is known as a external debt. When government borrow that, then it gives the brunt of the public debt. So government can take debt from the banks or business organization or business house or individual also. So there are various ways can government take a debt. So they can take a debt from the business organization, businesses, or banks, or some business houses. So basically, government can take debt from the inside of the country and from the outside of the country, and from the at a time they can take a debt in both of the sides. So government can take a debt in the outside of the country. It means that debt is known as a foreign debt or external debt. So they can take a debt from the outsiders, banks or businesses or the organization or some houses or some international organization. So such a debt is known as external debt. Similarly, if the government can take a debt in inside of the banks, businesses, organization, or individuals, so this such a debt is known as a domestic debt or internal debt. So according to there are some economics, they try to define the debt. So there are some important definition are there. So according to Dalton, public debt is a way to collecting the income from the public office. So according to Dalton also one public economics, and according to him, the public debt is a way of collecting income from the public offices. So it's a way to get the income for the government. In the modern day, it's known as a income source of a government. Next, we have the definition is given by the Mehta, J.K. Mehta. According to the Professor J.K. Mehta, so public debt is comparatively modern incident and would come in practical form with the development of a democratic government. So according to him, the public debt is a quite modern instrument which used to collect the revenue or raise the money from the market, for as well as it will be quite helpful for the development of a democratic government. Next, we have the according to the Adam Smith, so public debt create the conditions of the war and extra expenditure. So public debt are able to create the condition or able to control the condition of the war or some extra debt, extra expenditure. It will occur because of the natural calamities or natural disaster are there, or maybe some other factors. Or if a country facing the war, that time also we have to do some extra expenditure, and that extra expenditure we are able to raise through the public debt. So these are some definition. Through that definition, the public debt, it means it's a modern tools to collect the or raise a fund for the government, and as well as it will be quite helpful for the domestic development of a democratic government, and finance the war finance and extra expenditure finance we needed for the public debt. So basically, when government income is smaller than government expenditure, that time government have to raise some debt. Such a fund is known as a public debt, and most of the time, because their expenditure is quite greater than the revenue, because they are our government are adopting the welfare society or welfare economics, and because of that they have to spending lots of money on the various scheme, and that their sources of the income is or revenue sources are limited. So match the gap between the revenue and the expenditure. The public government have to raise fund through the public debt or the getting the debt from the domestic as well as external level. Next, we have the causes of the borrowing or causes of the public debt. So basically, what are the causes behind of a borrowing of a government? So government can borrow because it can possible that local income was not enough for the expenditure. So main cause behind the borrowing of the government, that is it can possible it cannot be possible the local income means the revenue which government collected from the various sources is not enough for their expenditure, and due to incidental expenditure government could have up to borrow, because it is not possible to increase the tax income at the point. So basically, government are borrowing because to cover his increasing expenditure, and they have the limited sources of getting revenue. Similarly, they are not able to increase the taxable income and in a particular time period. So that is the main cause behind the government can borrow some fund from domestic as well as the external sector. So, what are the causes when we discuss the causes? So, first, the small shares of the tax in the national income. This, when we think about the national income of India, so in present there is a part of the tax is less than 20% of the national income. So our government are getting very low amount through the taxable income. So that is a direct tax as well as an indirect tax, and that's why it quite enough. It's not enough income to fulfill the increasing the expenditures or increasing the people's wants. So that's why government have to get extra fund, or they need some extra fund, and that will be the fund will be provided to the public debt. Next, we have that is the burden of the indirect taxes. So indirect taxes, so government can get the income from the direct and indirect taxes. But when we compare the income of the government revenue of government revenue, what they getting the direct taxes and indirect taxes, most of the developing countries or underdeveloped countries, government can get more income from indirect taxes compared to the direct taxes, because it is quite limited to increase the direct tax source of income of direct taxes, and therefore government can impose the various tax on the goods and commodity as well as services, and they can collect the money from the quite more money compared to the direct tax to the indirect tax. So in Indian tax system, there is a burden of the indirect tax that is not just it in the economy. There is inflation increases indirect taxes. So it's not only the burden of the direct tax, But when the direct tax continuously increases, it will be have the impact on the increasing the price. It will be create the inflation in the market, and the complete the tax arrangement has become an imbalance and injustice. So that is to become an imbalance and injustice, because the indirect tax will be pay all communities. Those are the use take purchases the particular goods and commodity. It may be poor, it may be rich, or it may be middle class. So basically, that is not based on the income, or that is not based on the ability to pay of individuals. That is based on the who are the getting the use of particular goods or commodity or services. They have to pay that particular tax. It maybe he is a poor person, it maybe he is a rich person, no worry about their income. So basically, burden of the indirect tax will be increasing continuously, and to reduce such a burden of indirect taxes, we have to take another sources to get the income from the public debt. Next, third cause is why the government have to borrowing or public debt. So that is the Indian tax system is not work perfect, and in India there is a very high deviation, because our tax system is a full of error. According to the idea of the Professor Keldor, in India there are the tax evasions 200 to 300 crores every year. And expect these the complete the part of the income tax is never collected. So basically, the tax errors are quite more in India, not only India, but those are the developing country, and the parallel economy will be created because of the many people are not showing their whole income, or they are not ready to, happy to pay the tax on their wealth and the income. So that automatically the parallel economy or black economy created. And so imperfect tax system, maybe they can charge us quite higher rate of the taxes, or to filling the tax is quite difficulty to common person. So there is our awareness to pay a tax. There are various causes behind that of the tax errors or tax evasions we can see in the economy. So basically, imperfect tax system, that is not perfect tax system. There are various faults we can see in our Indian tax system, and that also have some impact to getting the more income from the taxation. Next, we have the misuse of the public income. So misuse of the public income, because of public income, government can get the income through the various sources, and that income is known as the public income. But most of the time, that income will be misused because of the corruption, because of the not the income is not spent in a proper manner, or that is not spending for the productive purpose, or sometimes that will be corruptions, or the whole amount is not spending on the particular project. There are various ways to misuse of the public income. So public incomes are the misuse. It will not use optimum use level use of the public income, and that's why it will be have some difficulty to get the revenue and the use of that revenue. So increasing the public debt, and that's why the increase in the public debt is continuously and quite bigger amount. So continuously public debt is increasing domestic as well as the external level, and similarly central government as well as the state government can raise the debt. Central government have the authority to, so that they can raise the debt from the domestic as well as the external sources. So external debt can get by the central government, and the state government can get the debt from the domestic internal debt, or in a permission. Before that, they have to take a permission from the central government. So basically, the debt is increasing, not only the state level but central level also. It will quite continuously increasing, and more it will become quite big issue, according to economic issue, before the country or before the central as well as state government. So now we have to think about the objectives of the public debt and public borrowing. So what are the objectives, or what are the main importance of the public debt or public borrowing? So first we have the income and the revenue. To collect the income or the to increase the revenue of the government, and that's why the government raise the debt from the domestic as well as the foreign market, and to improving the income situation and revenue conditions to get more revenue, because nowadays the government have to spend too much amount on the welfare of the society. The government have to fulfill various wants of the society, and that's why they needed quite a large amount of the money, and that amount of the money sometimes they are not able to get from their regular revenue sources, so they can get this money from the public borrowing, and it will be increase the revenue as well as the income of the government. Next, that is the second, we have the in times of the dispersion, in times of the depression. So in times of the depression, the government can use these public borrowing or public debt as an instrument to control depression. So basically, first we have to understand why depression is created. Most of the time, if in an economy the supply is a greater than demand, or people are not ready to demanding the commodity, or people don't have the purchasing power for purchasing power, or their purchasing power is reducing, that time the depression will be created in economy. To controlling such a situation, government can use these tools, that is public borrowing or public debt, so they can refund the debt which we are taking previously. So if they're refunding the repayment the debt, domestic debt, so people can get their money what they invest in the public debentures or public debt, so they get their principal as well as the interest on that principal, so they can spend the money in a market. That money, they can spend this money in the market, and it will be help to increase the demand of the peoples, and the demand increase automatically, the depression, the situation will be controlled. So basically, controlling the depression situation, or they can use the public debt. Similarly, they control the inflation situation. So oppositely, they can use this instrument to control the inflation situation. So inflation means continuously rise in price and reducing the value of the currency. That is known as inflation, and it will be happen because of the people have the too much amount in their hand, and their money income will be increasing. That's why they are demanding too much commodity from the market, and it is not possible to supply that much commodity in a short period. So the price of the commodities are the commodity and services increases continuously and quite fastly. That stage is known as inflationary. So controlling the inflation, government can raise the fund, or government can raise the borrowing from the people. So if they're raising the fund from the people, automatically some amount of their income they can transfer from the individuals or society to the government in terms of the public debt. So their income will be reducing, and their demand also can be controlled. So basically, to controlling the depression and inflation, the government can use, that is the budgetary instrument, that is the public debt. Through that, they can control the public inflation and depression. Next, we have the finance development plan. So financing the development plan. So there are various development plans are there, and sometimes it's not possible to provide the finance in a regular income sources, because the regular income sources are limited, and through that regular income sources it's not possible to provide the finance for the quite bigger development plan. For example, we have the plan like a bullet train from Ahmedabad to Bombay. So here to complete that development plan, to complete that project, we are getting loan from the Japanese government, and Japan provide loan, that is quite a $1.45 billion loan is given, provided by the Japan. So basically, to complete that particular plan or project, we can get the get the completion to the public expenditure or public borrowing. So to finance the development plan, it may be build a project the dam, it may be some building some infrastructures or basic infrastructures or some other sources. So that time government can get the if their revenue is not sufficient or not that much sufficient, they can get the financial support in terms of the public debt from the domestic as well as the external level. Next, that is the objective, that is the finance of public enterprise. So basically, the government starts some public enterprise. When in our cases, when we have in the stage of our development, so that time our power sector is not that much strong, and for the industrial development or making a development base of the development, so we have to develop some basic industry, and for the development of the basic industry, government can take initiative. They started investing in a basic industry. It may be power industry, cement industry, iron industry, or fertilizer industry, chemical industry. So government start their own enterprises. Government start invest on their own amount in particular enterprises to create some basic infrastructure for the development. And the finance of the public enterprise, which these public, most of the public enterprises are running in the losses. So when you take example like we take example like a railway. So railway also one public enterprise. We take example like our Maharashtra State Electricity Board. It also example of the public enterprise. But when we think about their income and expenditure, so most of the public enterprise are running in losses, and to recover their losses or to fulfill their financial need, that time government can get some debt from the domestic or international level. Next, to finance war finance. So basically, war is a man-made climate man-made problem is there, and in war situation, the government expenditure is increasing quite faster, and government have to purchase defense equipment. They have to spend too much amount on defense services and others also, and so that's why they need quite higher amount of the spending, and it is not possible to cover in regular revenue sources. So that time government can get the money or get extra fund from the borrowing or the we can say the public debt. For next, we have the for the establishment of the social society. So establishment of the social society to provide good services to the social society. It may be drinking water, health facility, education facility, infrastructures, communications, or other facility to provide the good facility or quality facility to the society. So government have to get spend too much amount on the such infrastructure, and that spending amount they can get through the debt also. And last one, we have the to make a public worthy favorables. So to make a public favorable, so government can every government try to make a happy to their publics, because they know they need a vote from them, and they have to spend too much amount on their welfare of the society. So basically, these are the some causes behind, or these are the some objectives of the public debt or public borrowing. Why the government taking the debt? So they can, or what are the objective behind take the debt, that is these are the objective. Basically, these are known as income, increasing income and revenue in times of the dispersion, to control the inflation, or to finance the development plan, the finance public enterprise, or to finance the wars for war expenditures, to establish a social welfare or social welfare in society, and similarly to make happiness among the people. So that's why government, these are the objective behind the public debt or public borrowing. Now we have to move in another slide where we try to explain the classification of the public debt. So basically, the classification of the public debt. So these are the one graph is there. So basically, it's showing that the classification of the public debt. So first, we have the classification of the public debt according to the maturity. So according to maturity, we are able to classify the public debt. Another classification, that's a public debt according to the resources, available resources. And third one classification is there, the public debt according to voluntaries. So these are the three main classification of the public experience, public debt. First, we have that is the quite public debt and classify according to the maturity. Maturity means the maturity time of the particular debt. Okay, and according to that time of the maturity, the debt can be classified. So it will be classified that is short-term debt, medium term debt, and long term debt. So basically, in short term debt, debt from 3 months to 1 years. So if the maturity period of the particular debt is 3 months to 1 year, that debt is known as a short term debt. Okay. Afterwards, we have the medium term debt. So in medium term debt, that maturity of the particular debt is 1 year to 5 years. It's known as a medium term debt. And last one, that is the long term debt. The maturity period of the such a debt is more than 5 years. It's more than 5 years, maybe 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. Okay, so basically, first classification is based on the maturity period or maturity time of the public debt, because when the government getting the debt, they have to repayment the principal as well as the interest on a debt, and that payment and repayment of the debt is it may be short term, it may be medium term, and it may be long term. So short term, it will basically more than 3 months to the 1 years. Medium term is known as a 1 year to the 5 years, and more than 5 years maturity. If they any debt have public debt have the maturity which is a more than 5 year, that is known as a long-term public debt. So the first classification according to maturity we discussed. Next, we have the public debt according to the resources. The public debt can be classified according to the resources. First, we have the internal debt, and another that is the external debt. So internal debt, it means the resources of the internal debt, or government can raise the fund, or government can raise the debt from the domestic people, organization, bank, houses, industrial houses, or some industries. So they can get the debt from such a person within a country, and such a debt is known as a internal debt. So basically, private individuals. So what are the sources for the internal debt? There are some various sources for the internal debt. First, we have the private individuals and the institutions. So the private individuals or institutions also from the government can get a debt. Next, we have the social security institutions and economic organization. There are some social security education institutions, and the economic organization can provide some amount of the debt to the government. Next, we have the commercial banks and the insurance companies. So, commercial bank and insurance company can provide some surplus income in terms of the government, in terms of the debt, and the central bank. So, in our case, RBI is our central bank. So, central bank also one source to get the public debt, internal or public internal debt. So, basically, in internal debt, which will be getting, the government can get this debt from the individuals, institutions, banks, or the central bank. So through that way, government can collect the fund, and that fund is known as the internal debt. Next, we have the external debt. So basically, external debt according to the maturity, external debt also can classify that is a short term, medium term, and long term. So short term, medium term, and long term, it means already we discussed about short term means 3 to 1 years is the maturity period. Medium term is a 1 year to 5 year is the maturity period, and long term is the more than 5 years is the maturity period. That time is become a long term. Afterwards, we have the according to use of the fund. So according to use of the fund, external debt can be classified. That is the first we have development credit or development debt, technical credit or technical debt, defense credit, donations. Similarly, these are the according to the use of the debt. So where we are using the debt, according to their use, the government or the external debt can be classified. First, we have the development credit. If we are using the debt for the development purpose, it's known as the development credit. Next, we have the technical credit. On third one, we have the defense credit and food. If the debt will be spent on a defense services, that is known as defense credit, and another the donation. So sometimes government gives some donation to other country, so that is also part of the external debt. Next we have the according to credentials. So basically, intergovernment borrowing or borrowing from the international organization. So intergovernment borrowing, it means if one government gives some debt to the other government, is known as intergovernment borrowing. Or for example, if America sanctions some amount of the debt to the Indian government, so that is known as intergovernment borrowing. And similarly, we have the international organization. International organization can provide some public debt to the government to the some various countries. So basically, that also known as borrowing from the international organization. So in that we have the IMF, World Bank, Asian Development Bank. So that such an organization can provide some loans to their members and some poor countries, that is known as international debt, borrowing from the international. So next we have the sources for borrowing from the private sources according to the debentures. So government can get the debt from the Indian sources according to debentures. So similarly, we have the public sector's external debt, private sector external debt. So there are also one classification: public sector external debt and private sector external debt. So public sector means that is raised by the public authority as central government or the permission of the central government, and private, it means a private individuals or a house, business house, they may be raised a fund through the permission of the central government. According to the repayment of the foreign debt, we can classify the foreign debt like a foreign currency debt and a local currency debt. So foreign currency debt, it means when the times of the repayment, we have to pay the repayment the debt in terms of the foreign currency, and in opposite, when we have in maturity period of the public debt, that time if they are allowed to repayment their debt in a local currency, so that is known as a local currency debt. So basically, debt can be classified, that is the secondary classification of the debt. It will be classified according to available resources, and majorly it will be classified, that is internal and external debt. Next, we have the public debt according to the voluntaries. So basically, voluntary debt and compulsory debt. Voluntary means those are volunteers. Those individuals have the voluntary. So it's not a compulsion to each and everybody have to purchase the government debentures, or they have to give the debt to the government in the various terms. But so that is known as a voluntary debt. But in compulsory debt, it means there will be compulsion. Government can make a compulsion to their servant, to the people, maybe they can purchase particular amount of the debentures, government debentures or government bond. Through that, they can provide debt to the government. So this is the classification of the public debt. So the public debt, it can be classified in broadly the three types. First, that will be classified according to the maturity. It will be classified according to the resources. It will be classified according to voluntaries. So that is the classification of the public debt. So broadly, the classification of the public debt we can explain further also. So first we discussed about the internal and external debt, internal and external debt. So basically internal debt, those debts taken from the country within a country is known as internal debt, and external debt is the debt taken from the foreign government, foreign organization, or foreign banks, or individuals also. Such a debt is known as a foreign debt or external debt. Productive. Next, we have the classification. Next, we have the classification of the public debt, that is the productive and unproductive debt. So, productive debts are those debts which are the use in the plan which provide the income. So, like railways plan of electricity and the plant of the irrigation, or that is known as a productive debt, because that will be used for the increasing the production. So if the debt is a spending to build a electricity plant, to provide the to build a dam or irrigation facility, so it will be used for the increasing the production, and that's why it's known as a productive debt. But sometimes if the debt are used unproductive purpose, for example to fulfill war expenditures, or it will be used for the giving the payment of the government servant payment or administrative expenditures. So basically such a expenditures of the debt is unproductive, and such expenditure is unproductive, and we are not getting any production or surplus of that particular expenditures, and such expenditure is known as a unproductive debt or unproductive expenditures. Next, we have the redeemable and the unredeemable debt. Redeemable and unredeemable debts. So basically, redeemable debts are those debts the government promise that he will pay back the debt on a fixed date. So here, redeemable debt, where government gives a form promise for the pay of the particular debt amount and interest in a fixed date. So that is the this investment like FD. So the rate of the return will be already fixed, and the maturity period also fixed. So in the maturity after the maturity period, government can repay the principal as well as the debt interest on the particular amount of the debt. Next, we have the irreliables and debt. Irreliable debts are those debts which, without any permission, they are called irreliable debts. So here we don't have to fix a maturity period. We don't have any maturity period. The maybe interest rate is fixed, but the maturity period is not there. So that is another third classification of the public debt. Next, we have the funded and funded and non-funded public debt. So funded and non-funded public debt. So first, we have the funded public debt. That is, funded debts are long-term debts. Payment of this debt can be done within 1 year, or it can be possible not give the many promises regarding. In others words, funded debts are those debts in which the payments are given within the 1 year. So funded debts, it will be, in simple language we can say, it will be repaid within a 1 year. So the funded debt is a short-term debts. Okay, and it will be government give the promise regarding the repayment and interest rate on the debt, and they can repayment such debt within a 1 year, and that debt is known as a funded debt. Or another, we have the unfunded debt. So treasury bonds are unfunded debts because these debts are given for 3 or 6 months, and their time period is not more than one. So basically, unfunded debt, that is the treasury bills, it is issued by the government through the RBI, and through the treasury bills, government can raise the fund or raise the debt, and that treasury bills will be purchased by the commercial bank, because commercial bank have to manage their SLR and CRR, and to managing such a ratio, they needed some securities or treasury bills, short-term treasury bills, and they can purchase such treasury bills. So basically, the amount, the time period of that particular treasury bills, that is 3 years to 6 months, 3 to 6 months, and their period of the not more than 1 year, so it's less than 1 year. Next, we have the voluntary and compulsory loans. So we discussed about the voluntary. So government debts are normally voluntary natures. So government cannot, it's not possible to government make compulsory debt to the each and everybody. So basically, voluntary natures and the person, organization control the government bonds and voluntary. So person as well as a particular organization can uh, control the by the government bonds market and voluntary of the government bonds market. Similarly, we have the compulsory loan in opposite of that. But today, compulsory loans are not much popular, but the condition of the war, if we have the condition like a war or some pandemic conditions or some other condition is there, so government can put a pressure on the people to give a loan. So government can directly put on pressure to the people so they can provide a loan to them. So that is known as a compulsory loan. So basically, loan can public borrowing can classify that is voluntary and compulsory loans which are they're getting. Next, we have the with rate of the interest and without rate of the interest. So public borrowing can be classified with the rate of the interest and without rate of the interest. So basically, with the rate of the interest on loans, the rate of the interest government give us that is a fixed rate. So government give you the fixed rate for in a with the rate of the interest, and in the fixed maturity period is there. Okay, but debt without rate of the interest, it means debt without rate of the interest. Loans you do not have any pay any interest. So without rate of the interest means debt without rate of the interest, and loan gives do not have any payment in terms of the interest. So such a way also we are able to classify our public expenditures or public borrowing. Next, we have the public debt, total debt, and a net debt. So total debt on fixed time, whatever the debt government have, that debt is known as a total debt. So total debt means on a particular time of the period, whatever the debt of the government have, that is known as a total debt. So basically, on the fixed time of the whatever the debt government have, the total of all is the called a total debt. Next, we have the net debt. If the government collect any fund to pay back the debts, or they can arrange some fund amount of the fund to that fund amount have to subtract from the total debt, and that is known as a net debt. So sometimes government can create some fund, that is the debt. The fund will be created. The purpose of the creating such a fund to repayment of the debt in the future. So the amount of the particular fund amount, it will be able to subtract from the total amount, total debt, and we are able to get the net debt. So that is the another classification. That is total and a net debt. Next, we have the short-term, long-term debt. Already we discussed about the short-term and long-term debt. It based on their maturity period, and basically 3 months to 1 years is known as the short-term debt, and long-term it means when the debt maturity period or repayment period is the more than 5 years. That time we can say it's a long-term debt. So that is the classification of debt. Now we have to think about the advantages of public debt. What are the advantages of the public debt or public borrowing? So increasing the origin of the money, or we can say the increasing the source of the revenue. So through the public debt or public borrowing, government able to increase the source of the revenue, increase the source of the money, and so that increasing the source or surplus, so they can use for the wealth creation or the development process. So basically, first advantage you can say the increase origin or increase the source of the money or source of the revenue. Second, that is the suitable repayment balance. So suitable repayment of the balance, government can put some amount for the repayment of the public debt. So suitable repayment balance also another advantage of public debt. Economic development, because of the sometimes the developing country or poor country, they have the limitation to getting the quite higher amount of the revenue, and that's why they are facing some difficulty in economic development process. So through the public debt, it may be internal or it may be external, they can boost their economic development plan or the project. It will be help to increase the standard of the living in the people. Next, we have the control of the national calamities. So control of the national calamities also another advantages of public debt, because in the national calamities the government have to spend too much amount, quite larger amount, and the government expenditure will be increasing, and it's not possible to cover that expenditure in regular ways of the income or regular ways of the government revenue. So what the government do? So government can create some fund or raise some fund to control such a natural calamities. The social welfare condition, successful war condition. So in a war condition, we have to spend too much amount on a defense and defense on defense equipment or some other services. So that time to spending such increasing the income or to fulfill the amount of the government to spend quite higher level, the public debt is quite helpful to provide resources for the spending of the war. Next, ensure the investment. So ensure the investment is based on the public debt, because through the public debt, the government is able to develop some infrastructures, and if the basic infrastructure is available, so that will be ensure the investment of the particular person. So basically, through the public expenditure, we are able to ensure the condition or ensure the investment also quite important. Next, we have the public work. So through the public expenditures, or public burden or public borrowing, so the public work will be happens, and non-economic benefit also is available there. So basically, these are the some advantages according to the public debt. So government can raise the fund, and they are raising the fund in terms of the public revenue, public debt, and they are getting some. These are the advantages. Next, we have the disadvantage of this public debt. So first disadvantage is known as a misuse of the resource of the country. Sometimes the government can get debt easily from the domestic or their institutions level, and maybe the resource which government have available, they can misuse. They maybe can misuse the resources, and it have some quite more impact on the further development of a country, or adverse impact on the further development of a country. Next, we have the fear of a government bankruptcy. So, government bankruptcy, or we can say the corruption will be arise. Okay, because the government getting quite higher amount, a higher source in their hand, and to spending such a source of the hand, automatically bank bankruptcy and as well as the some corruptions are increasing. Nature of the extravagancy. The nature of the extravagancy also one disadvantages of this public expenditures. Next, we have the public burden. The political burden will be arise with the public debt is increasing. Automatically, political burden also increasing. It may be sometimes we are getting the burden from the outsiders. So emergency. So it will be great. Our government can go through a emergency, economical emergency, or we can have the political emergency also. And burden on the public. So burden on the public. So public burden will be increasing. If the debt increasing, automatically average debt of the per person, that is known as the burden of the public debt, will be increased. So basically, economic backwardness also increasing, well, because of the public debt. Because the public debt the government can get easily money, and so while if they are getting easily money, so while they're spending such a money, they are not thinking about their productivity or the where they have to spend that much amount. So basically, these are the some disadvantage of the public debt. Now we have to move another slide where we try to explain the methods of the repayment of the public borrowing or public debt. So basically, there are various methods are using for the repayment and repayment of the public borrowing or public debt. So first we have the debt re, reputations. So basically, the debt repudiation means deny the payment of the debt by the government in 1970. So it will be directly denied by the government to repayment the debt. Okay, that will be some example is there. In 1917, it had done by the Soviet government, where they denied to pay uh, uh, Christian debts. It may the some state of the United States of the America before the domestic war of 1861 or 1865. Same time had done by the denied the debt to pay a debt from the English citizens. So basically, when the government sometimes government can deny the payment to repay, but it will have the impact adverse impact on economy also, because when the government denied to pay debt, then the faith of the peoples uh, and the banks on the government will be reduced. So it have the impact on the internal as well as external. Similarly, if they need some new payment or new for money, so that they are not the others are not ready to provide it. So next we have the refunding. So refunding means if the government issue the new bonds for repayment of the current debt, so then it is called refunding or refining. The same is the name of the process by which new bonds are charged in the place of the maturing the bonds. So sometimes payment is done before the maturing the date of the bonds, or sometimes government can use the refunding through they can issue the new bonds for the repayment of the old loans. So that also another way where government can use to repayment of their debt. Next we have the conversion of the debt. So government can convert the debt means change the old debt into the new debts. So government can convert the debt in a it means they can change the old debt into the new debt. According to this theory, the payment of the debt is not done reality. So payment is not done in really, but only the form of the debt change. The changing the debt, and the process of the conversion of the debt means the change high interest rate, or they charge quite higher interest rate compared to the previous interest rate. So that is the quite another conversion of the debt is also used for the payment of repayment of the public borrowing or public debt. Next, we have the seeking fund. So basically, the methods which is the normally adopted for the regular repayment, and where the government can construct one seeking fund, means they are constructing of such a fund which define a part of the government income and submitted each and every years to repayment of done by the that from that fund. So government can put some amount of the each and every year of their income amount of particular amount in a particular fund, and each and every year they try to repayment the amount of the loans through and the principal through that fund. Next, we have the surplus revenue. Government can make some surplus. It means government revenue. If the government revenue is quite larger than government expenditures, it will be government can have a surplus, or government try to give the surplus budget, and through that surplus they can use this surplus or surplus income or surplus revenue to repayment or repayment of the public debt or and public debt principles and interest. It will be reduce the burden of the public debt on the government. So basically, these days government expenditure is increasing rapidly, but sometimes government can use the surplus budget, and through the surplus budget they try to repayment public debt. Next, we have the criminal annuities. So, government can issue such criminal annuities, a part which matures every years according to the serious numbers, and they pay and their payment is paid each and every year. So uh, government can issue such criminal annuities, and a part of their maturity or the years according to the several numbers, and their payment as done by each and every year. So determination of the several number is either done in a string or by the lottery, or they are done by the lottery. So through the lottery they can fix the number of the repayment of the debt, and the debt will be repayment by the each and every years continuously. It will be help to reduce the burden among the public debt. Next, we have the capital levy. So, government can charge some capital levy taxes. Is indicators of the very heavy taxes on the property of the wealth. So, government can collect account quite extra income through the levying some high taxes on the property, and they get some extra wealth or extra income. It is imposed only once on the properties of the capitals of more from the different value. So they can impose on the capital properties, and government can get the money through the through their taxation. So capitals levy has been instructed to be imposed just after the war, also that wartime also, because of wartime it needs a quite higher amount of the expenditure, and to fulfill such amount that taxes will be useful. So they are the imposed several wise and single property. So government can collect the money for the repayment or funding the principal and the interest on public debt through the capital levy. They can charge some taxes, higher rate taxes on the wealth and the property of a person, and through they can collect the extra or surplus income, and the surplus income they can use for the repayment of the public debt. Last one, we have the repayment of the external. Now, up to here, we discuss only the repayment of the internal debt or the domestic debt, because it's quite easy to repayment the domestic debt, because we are getting the domestic debt in a domestic currency, and while the repayment debt that is also done in a domestic currency. But when we are taking the debt from the foreign countries or foreign organization, that debt are in terms of the foreign currency. So checking of the foreign debt can be only when foreign currency is earned for their payment, and the foreign currency can be earned only when the export. So basically, that that debt will be can be repayment in terms of the foreign currency. So we are getting the foreign currency. We have to earn the foreign currency. There are various way to earn in the foreign currency, but one an important way to get a foreign currency, that is increasing the export. When we have the surplus in a export, so that surplus can use to uh, to repayment the foreign debt. But because we are exporting some commodities, similarly we are importing also some commodities, and we have to fulfill the payment of the import in a foreign currency. When the government export is greater than the import, it means they are getting some surplus in their foreign trade, and that surplus of the currency of the foreign currency can be used to repayment in a foreign debt. And similarly, if the foreign debts are invested in such a trade which is increasing the completion of the substitutes of the expenditure or of the export. So if the foreign debt are used in a proper manner, if there it will be used for the production activities. So basically, it will be increase the production of in internal factors, and it will be, if we are using those to make some substitutes of the export or the export commodity, it will be quite easy to get money from the export, and that money will be can use for the repayment of the debt. But if the foreign debt is used unproductive work, then the export surplus can only create it. So if the foreign debt is producing only non-productive work, or it will use non-productive work, then to fulfill that the repayment of the foreign currency or foreign debt will be happen only through the create some surplus in the export. And nowadays, to creating the surplus in the export is quite difficult for the developing country, because in the developing countries their import is quite higher than the export, and each and every time they have the deficit in their balance of payment. So they are not able to create some surplus currency through the international trade, and that's why the burden of external debt continuously arises. And that's why they can face some critical crisis, that is the foreign exchange crisis. We will know that. So that will be happen in with the Sri Lanka. Similarly, it will be happen with the Pakistan also. So basically, it can to fulfill repayment of external debt is quite difficult, because for external debt we are not able to or we don't have authority to print external currency or foreign currency. We are able to get the currency in various activities. So this is a condition the people fear the burden of the foreign debt. So therefore, the people have quite higher burden compared to the domestic debt to the foreign debt. So basically, so this repayment of the foreign debt is another part, and government can repay this debt in terms of the foreign currency, and they can repayment through the they are getting the currency from the various sources. And one an important source is the that is the known as export or surplus in a export import. So these are the for public borrowing or public debt. So now we are able to conclude today's lecture. What we have to do today, basically, today we try to understand the introductory part of the public debt, definitions, and some causes of a borrowing or public debt. Why the government borrow or getting the debt from the public. Next, we have the objectives of the public debt. So there are several objectives of the behind the public debt. Afterwards, we have the classification of the public debt. That classification is in terms of the maturity, in terms of the available resources, and in terms of the voluntaries. Next part, where we try to explain all the classification or all the types of the public debt. Hello. हो संपलाय तुम्ही संपवते कट झाले लिंक नाही केलं करतो Okay.